I think read some of your previous research, and you were saying that one of the biggest problems facing this kind of topic of study is that people tend to view everything as a big monolith, right? Would you like to talk more about that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So basically, when I started the project, it started out as the sort of understanding of China-Africa relations from a historical perspective. The reason why I chose this sort of methodology is I'm very much aware of the literature on China-Africa in the past, probably about like 2 decades. So there is a emerging academic but also popular interest about what China is and has been doing in Africa. But very much of that literature is a generalized, oversimplified understanding of China as either a neo-colonial player or a altruistic, very much a friend to African countries, which is, I think, very simplified understanding about the whole picture. So I think my project started out as to challenge that kind of claim.
Okay. Yeah. And which one do you feel, I guess they're both very simple, right? But I think we hear a lot of neo-colonial narratives here. If you read the British press, there is a lot of claims that, what this is happening in Africa is very much similar to what the Europeans did. What do you find? Do you find that to be the case, or is it true in some cases not?
Yeah, I think I've been asked about that question like since ever I started the project. I think one question that people often assume is understanding about British imperialism as something a fixed project, as something simplified as a sort of economic, political, cultural exploitation of the people and mineral resources in that sense. But very people get to ask about British Empire imperialism in Africa as a historical project. It's actually, we have to understand the complexities about imperialism and empire building in the sense that even if we use the very simplified term as new imperialism, we have to ask ourselves, what do you mean here in terms of the standard empire building process, which I don't think there ever existed a standard empire building. And in that sense, I feel it's kind of interesting to bring about the perspectives in terms of understanding the contemporary narratives about why people think that China would, in a way look similar to what British used to do 100 years ago. And in my own research, I think one particular interesting entry for people to think about is, for example, firstly, in terms of economic investments, in the sense that using a very much Marxist dependency theory, that Africa became a primitive market for providing raw materials. And in that sense, they tease out examples like Angola and Sudan, by saying that, the reason why they could economically grow is because of China's sort of presence and taking exploitatively of the resources. But on the other hand, I feel like about that narrative is about understanding of neo-imperialism, neo-colonialism, whatever that could be said, is that claim was based on the fact that the influences of the former imperialist power has been in decline. In the sense of like whose power it has been challenging, in the sense about this is always a pre-assumption that Africa has been a victim of external exploitation, let alone West or China. And China was simply termed as a replacement of the European colonialism. In that sense, I feel it's quite problematic because you actually underestimated the diversity and agency of African actors, not alone the African political elites, but also multinational companies, but also labor union and NGOs. So they're quite a complex local regional players on the ground that you can't simply say that this was a kind of exploitative government to government or country to country sort of exploitative unequal economic partnership. So I think that's the kind of first thing I'm going to challenge for the kind of problematic term, a symptomatic term of calling something as simply like neo-colonialism. But I do acknowledge that the power relations between individual African states and China was not always equal on every single perspective. So that's why if you see about the FOCAC meeting, that's the short term of Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, that China hosted a multinational level of collaboration kind of conference in the sense to welcome individual African head of states or senior ministers to come and discuss about various economic issues. Of course, the meeting took a shift in between Beijing and other African states. But at the end of the day, the agreement they negotiated was actually very much on bilateral terms. So this is quite different from what, for example, Pan-Africanists would argue in terms of we need a unified regional strategy of dealing with powerful states, including China. I mean, powerful states including European Union, US and Japan, all these countries included. But in the sense that African Union, for example, or regional government bodies like ECOWAS, SADC, EAC, all these regional bodies should deal with China as a single unity. But this is quite different from the kind of initiative put forward by FOCAC in the sense that it's a multilateral platform, but in terms of the deals, it's still a sort of bilateral term. So I think in that sense, I would say the relative bargaining power of African member of states could possibly be constrained by that strategy. But I would definitely say that this is far from calling it like neo-colonialism, because that was not going on 100 years ago when British South African company tried to develop their gold mining activities in Wits or Northern Rhodesia, today's Zambia, because that was totally a kind of a deceived strategy of gaining a lot of resources and power there. So there was a very different kind of dynamics on both sides. Yeah.